All right. So we had the presynaptic neurology. So we had the neurotransmitters, again, these tiny little dots, because these are the chemical messengers that you'll see throughout. We have the neurotransmitter reuptake pump, neurotransmitter receptors here near the dendrum, and we have the axon on top. So remember, we have the dendritic and the axon trying to communicate with one another. We have then postsynaptic density, voltage-gated CA++ channel, then synaptic vesicle. I'm not going to require you to know all these terms, just so you understand when we say the term connection, making a connection, this is what we're referring to. We want to see the chemical messengers coming from the axon into the dendrites, connecting through the synapse. We want these synapses basically to get smaller and smaller, right? Because the closer the connections, the stronger the connections. And the stronger the connections, the easier it is to recall. It's basically forming a habit as a result, right? We have an automatic response when we hear a bell, perhaps in high school. The bell, without anyone having to tell you, means you need to pick up your books and go to another class, or go to your locker, or leave the school, because at the end of the day, that's a learned response, right? Those strong connections we made in our brain were due to experiences or exposure over time. Again, chemical messengers, neurotransmitters connecting more and more. So that's basically what we refer to when using that term connection. All right, so postsynaptic neurology, diversity, and pharmacotherapy. Race and gender can significantly impact the outcomes of psychopharmacotherapy. The reason for that is because we're talking about biological issues. When we're talking about psychopharmacotherapy, and gender plays a role because we're dealing with the biological processes. There are a lot of different chromosomes in a male versus a female. We want to remember to take that into consideration whenever we're talking with the psychiatrist. Again, the psychiatrist will know a lot more about this than you, which is why we refer to them for the recommended medication. Cross-ethnic variations in drug effects. Ethnic variations and presence of enzymes CYP2D6 impacts drug metabolism. The reason for that, again, is same for gender. There are differences even in different ethnicities, or even in cultural regions, different areas, different regions of the world, right? When we're talking about an African American, for example, they're going to have more melatonin than American here, right? So it's really, really important to take even those cultural considerations when looking at what medications work better for your client. Key neurotransmitters, talked a lot about the serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Serotonin refers to what mood typically?
Depression.
Typically depression, right? Good. And then the dopamine refers to, what is it? Okay, good. More of the pleasure. And then when we have norepinephrine, epinephrine, all those
are all accelerators.
Exactly. Accelerators, adrenaline. We're talking about maybe.
Well, epinephrine is adrenaline.
Yes. Yes. All right. Life cycle of neurotransmitters. Synthesis means what? Okay, good. Yeah, synthesis is basically on the merging to get successful. They're able to work in balance with each other. Packaging and storing in synaptic vesicles, transport, release, binding to postsynaptic receptor proteins, diffusion, destruction, or reuptake. Okay, so basically, this refers back to that picture we saw with the axion and dendrite on the bottom, right? We had the synthesis of neurotransmitters, those tiny little dots in the nerve cells, traveling through the synapses. We want them to be received, transported, released. Again, really, really important to at least know a little bit about it. We're not going to, again, cover a lot of this in your final exam, but it is important to know some of the basic concepts that we have discussed in the past.
Next, I'm going to have from here now to the
The
chapters.
midterm one, right?
The final exam will cover from the midterm and on. So it's not cumulative, but it will be from half the semester. Okay, so key concepts of pharmacokinetics. how the body deals with the drug, 4 processes: absorption, distribution, biotransformation, elimination. Half-life, time required for the concentration or amount of drug in the body to be reduced by 1/2. I am going to emphasize that term because you'll hear that term a lot, half-life. Half-life is used all the time with treatment teams, psychiatrists. Psychiatrists actually use it, assuming you know that term already. So just be really familiar with it. And it's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the time required for the concentration or amount of drug in the body to be reduced by 1/2.
In this case, they're talking about biological half-life, right?
Yes, and also with the actual medication, because even though we aren't dealing with the biological process here, we're dealing with it in the context of medication. So it's really important to know the half-life in regards to a client's medication, because why? Why would the psychiatrist maybe mention the half-life of a medication? Hey, how long has it been since he took or she took?
Is that way to determine the dosage of medication?
Okay, yeah, dosage plays a role in it, but also could represent if the dosage is correct or not.
Okay.
If behaviors start to show, let's take for example from the previous one, Xanax, I'm dealing with anxiety. If the half-life is, let's say, 4 days or 4 hours, let's start with 4 hours, then, which is pretty extreme, but let's say it's 4 hours, then, well, it might explain some behaviors observed maybe in a unit, maybe explain some behaviors observed by the parent. Hey, I noticed right when he takes the medication, he's great for the first 3 or 4 hours, very calm, coherent, linear thinking, productive, respectful, and follows all the rules. However, it's almost like clockwork. Right around after 4 hours, he takes it at noon, right by 4 p.m., he's off the wall, disrespectful, breaking the rules, aggressive, violent, and he ran away. I don't know what happened. So again, it's going to be really important to know the medication he's using, because then we communicate that to the psychiatrist and say, hey, listen, maybe the dosage isn't about, oh, well, you know what, that's because the half-life is right around there. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, so if that's the half-life, do we want to increase it? Should we try different medication? Do we want to intervene with a behavioral approach? Do we want to try putting him maybe in a class, or putting him in the gym at 4 o'clock to get out all of his energy, right? So again, it takes a lot of creative thinking at that point, but another example, just one example of how a half-life can be used.
It's the life of the medicine.
If I take a pill,
Generally, yes.
if I take a pill, I break my pills in half, like for a headache or something, that lasts me all day.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody else, they take a whole, like another lady, the same pill I take to leave, she take 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
I can only take a half of one.
Yeah. It could be tolerance. It could be just maybe your body reacting differently to it. Perhaps you have a different chemical composition than your friend, right? Which more than likely is the case.
Yeah.
It really comes down to a lot of factors, though, and those factors, or the possible contributing factors, is what you want to be aware. We mentioned possible tolerance. Perhaps your friend has taken only for the past 3 years. Maybe she didn't start out at 3. Maybe she started out just like you, with taking half. But because she's taken so much over time, she's increased her tolerance of it, and in order to have the same effect, needs to take more.
So that's similar to half time, the half of life in some way.
So half-life would basically mean that your Tylenol or Aleve wouldn't be as effective as it would be in the past, because you're building a tolerance. But the half-life just means when it starts to wear off without any
I
tolerance.
see, okay.
And also can be used, this term can be used like, let's say you take some kind of medicine and you have to wind down the medicine, and you
Yes,
like
taper
to have
down.
life
Yes,
of the medicine,
correct.
so you can.
That's a great way to taper down. That's exactly it. So when I mentioned the word taper, it means that you're weaning off, you're slowly decreasing the amount of medication you take, right? So let's say your client was abusing Xanax for a very long period of time. He was taking X amount of Xanax. The psychiatrist recommends we taper off the client from Xanax, that means we're going from maybe 100 milligrams to 50 milligrams to 10 milligrams and then eventually 0 milligrams, right? Versus going cold turkey, not having any medication from the get-go, which can be, yeah, that can be deadly in some cases. Again, which is why you want to refer to a psychiatrist. You'll have a working relationship with a psychiatrist. He'll have a very close relationship with you. Okay, so let's pause there for right now. We'll take a little break. It's 8:38. Let's come back at 8:50. So we have almost a 15-minute break, and then we'll continue.
Okay, so we're gonna have 8 chapters for the final exam.
I have to double check, but that sounds about right. Okay, let's continue. Welcome back from your break. Key concepts of pharmacodynamics, how drugs act on the body. So drugs bind to and interact with a receptor in one of 2 ways. There are agonists, which activate or enhance cellular activity. The antagonist blocks the binding of an agonist, but does not activate the receptor. A biological theory of craving. So craving affects dependence, relapse, and treatment. In your own words, how would you define craving?
The need to have the substance.
Exactly. The need to have it. I really like that word need because that means you can't go without it, right? That is a very good description of craving. Multiple types of cravings. We have 3 types for alcohol. We have reward sensitivity, stress reduction, disinhibition. So reward sensitivity is basically that you are very vulnerable to the substance, therefore you are craving and you want those vulnerabilities managed better. So those sensitivities are basically rewarded usually through alcohol, and that's where reward sensitivity comes into play as one type of craving. Stress reduction really as self-explanatory.
There was a drug, I don't remember the name, but it was talking about reward sensitivity. It was a kind of sexual arousing. I don't remember the name. It was a pill, and you take it, and so your sexuality. So people started taking this.
Okay,
drug.
yeah.
The disco.
Ecstasy.
Ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
Yeah.
But
Very
and a
common.
friend of mine took it. And I never took drugs, but she took it. And the other day, she was so miserable.
Mm.
She was so depressed. And she was actually sitting on the floor. I said, really that you like that? Really that you like taking this?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably recovering from it.
Yeah, so that's why people need this sensation again and again and again. So they start taking addicted to it.
Oh yeah, yes. And
Because
some drugs unfortunately only take
sensitivity
just once.
It's so high when they are on the effect of the drug that when they don't have it, they feel so miserable.
They crash, yeah.
They crave for it.
Yeah, exactly. So one other type of craving is to decrease the tension. Perhaps they're becoming more stressed because they're not being able to take it. And the other is disinhibition. We have hormones playing a role in craving, anti-craving drugs. The professional counselor's role in addiction pharmacotherapy. So what do you all need to know in regards to pharmacotherapy? More contact with clients than prescribing physicians. So I mentioned that earlier, which is really, unfortunately, oftentimes the case. You're going to have a lot more interaction with the client than the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist ideally should be meeting with the client around or just as much the same time, as much time as you meet with the client, but that's probably rare. So the psychiatrist is going to really look to you for the behavioral symptoms, any updates, any cravings. A lot of times that's the number one question to ask. What are the cravings of the client recently? That's where a Likert scale is really helpful on a 0 to 10 scale, where your cravings, 0 being none, 10 being the highest or strongest, and you record those. And a lot of times clients record their craving each day for not only the therapist, but also for the psychiatrist, strong working alliance with clients, client education. So really educating the client on pharmacotherapy, again, when there is that anti-medication bias. I don't want to take any medication. I'm afraid I might be too vulnerable. I may abuse it. Promote medication compliance. So listen to clients' beliefs, ground discussion in client's point of view. Again, this is where motivational interviewing can come into play. Collaborating with the client is the goal. Listening to the client, empathizing with the client's needs, and shaping their core beliefs in some way can help them view medication from a more positive perspective. Remember, we talked about reframing a situation.
Yeah.
The situation oftentimes can be medication, and we want to reframe, look at it from a different perspective.
So in the example you were giving us earlier about the hypothetical client that was a 17-year-old male that he didn't want to take medication.
Yeah.
So that way, in that sense, we could listen to the client and grab a discussion there. That's
Yeah, exactly. Have a discussion about it. You don't want to be like the bad example of motivational interviewing saying, listen, you need to do this. I know better than you type of attitude. You just need to listen to me. I'm the therapist. You're the client. You're wrong. You're basically stupid. And if you don't do what I say, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. We don't want to take that approach. And while it is true, you're going to generally have a lot more education regarding therapy and medication, we don't want to use that type of hard posture when communicating with the client. What happens when you do? What raises? What increases?
defenses.
Defenses. F you. Right? Like, oh, I don't need you. What, you think you know better than me? Why do you think
Yeah.
you? So again, it really hurts the rapport.
And it's very reasonable, this way that the client feels.
Yes.
Especially if the addiction began with taking pills or taking some medicine, some kind of medicine, it's very reasonable that he's afraid of really getting dependent.
That's a great way to validate the client. I like that phrase, it's really reasonable to understand. It's very reasonable for them to think about that medication that way. Totally understandable. So that's the first step of any good therapist. Validate just like you did, then clarify the situation, see if there's ever been a time where maybe they took medication and it did have a positive effect, or has there ever been at least one time where they took medication and were able to manage it, did not abuse it. If so, you just redirect them to that possibility. Not saying for sure, it's not certain that they're going to be okay, but just looking at the possibility that, hey, maybe this situation can be like that one. Oh, you said you took Xanax before and you were able to go for 6 months without abusing. It was just after 6 months it was really hard. Okay, well, that's good to know. Perhaps redirecting them to the possibility, right, that this can be similar to that same situation. So
Sure.
It all begins, though, with validation. So pharmacotherapy of alcohol addiction, many systems play a role in alcohol dependence. More than 150 medications have been used to treat alcohol addiction. So when you talk about alternatives, there are a lot of alternatives out there. That's another reason why I have a great working relationship with your psychiatrist. Your psychiatrist will know plenty of non-stimulant medications to treat a lot of the common disorders associated with substance abuse. For example, depression and anxiety. I've worked with several psychiatrists and worked at several treatment facilities where those alternative medications were the only medications they were allowed to prescribe. Some treatment facilities did not even allow the psychiatrist to prescribe stimulant medications. For example, if they had ADD but they were refusing Adderall, there were other non-stimulant medications that still were just as effective, backed by evidence, backed by treatment, backed by research, to be almost as effective as stimulant medications. So there are a lot of options out there.
This kind
Yes.
of aversion, I have a story that calls me that in my family, my uncle, he used to smoke. He used to smoke a lot. And once my cousin also started smoking, but hated it. And then my uncle saw him smoking, and he made him eat the cigar.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
He never smoked it again. And then he hates it.
Okay.
this is was a shock to him, but it caused aversion to him. He really hates cigarettes,
I can see why.
but he had to eat it. He ate it.
Wow.
This caused aversion.
That makes sense. So there are three types of treatment: aversion, alcohol withdrawal, and anti-craving. So aversion treatment for alcohol, first line. We have basically anti-abuse, first pharmacotherapy available. Goal is to develop an aversion to it. We have alcohol withdrawal treatment, first line. 10% of those in withdrawal experience severe symptoms. We have diazepam, Valium, lorazepam, Ativan, other benzodiazepines. Increased sedation, memory problems, addiction. So it's going to be really important you know some of the side effects of the medication because they're going to be related to the medication they take. For example, if they take any of these, Valium, diazepam, Ativan especially, they may in fact have very flat affect the next time you see them because it increases sedation. This happened with one client in particular who was under 18, come with his parents. His parents were really worried because they were worried he was sneaking on the side of using substances because he had flat affect. They thought it was a front. They tried that he was trying to mislead them and cover up his story whenever they would ask, again, because of a flat affect, when in reality, it had a lot more to do with the side effects of the medication. He wasn't abusing any medication. He wasn't sneaking around anywhere. And when his parents would ask, it was basically what they saw, a side effect of the medication. So it's really important how medication interacts with your client and to not take that wrong, like to not misinterpret it, and to really educate even your client's parents or client's families or client's siblings, whoever is involved with the client's treatment, to let them know, hey, you may expect this and might want to look for these behaviors in the next few weeks. It increases sedation, or the opposite, it increases anxiety. Perhaps the client becomes really anxious, and as a result, parents or siblings or spouse think they're using again because they're anxious. But remember, we're dealing with pharmacology, and that has an impact. Alcohol withdrawal treatment, second line. We have lowered alcohol intake and craving, anxiety. We have just some more medications, fewer side effects than benzodiazepine. Also anti-craving properties.
Do we need to
You don't need to know any of these. You don't need to know any of these medications. No, that's fine. Yeah. No.
my brains cannot hold that.
If you all were in medical school training to be psychiatrists, then yes. But no, we're not.
Carbamazepine is still in the benzo family, though, isn't it?
Which one?
Carbamazepine?
Yes.
I mean, it has less.
Yes. But it's not as severe.
But that, like Valium and whatever the other one was.
Yes.
That's very strong, right? It's very.
Yeah, it's pretty strong.
Yeah, it's
That is
controlled stage 3.
She's older, but she took Valium for years and years, and now she has memory problems.
Mm-hmm.
Severe, like.
Yes. Well, the downside with a lot of these medications is that, as you even heard on the video, over time it decreases the neurotransmitters, which means that you need to increase the medication, but there are certain caps on medication. You can't infinitely increase Adderall, for example, or Xanax, right? There are going to be certain limits, ethical limits, and legal limits on how much the psychiatrist can legally prescribe to a client. The max, I think, for, let's say, Adderall or Concerta, no, it's different for Concerta. Adderall, I think, is like 60 milligrams. I think that's the max that any psychiatrist can legally prescribe. I mean, 60 milligrams of Adderall, even twice a day, that's a heck of a lot. But because your body builds tolerance, because these are chemicals, you're going to need more to produce the same effect. And then what happens when you reach your max, you no longer produce the same effect, or perhaps you have these downsides of, for example, a downside of Adderall could be anger outbursts, or it could be, for some medications, memory loss, or for others it could be weight gain, right? So if you're dealing, I think this is very common for depression. A lot of medications for major depressive disorder, while help increase the chemical have a lot of negative side effects. For example, significant increased weight. So if someone was really depressed because of their weight, or decreased because they're being made fun of because of their weight for their whole life, is now gaining weight in order to get that medication, right? So part of their medication, part of the treatment is to have that medication, but the medication makes them gain weight, and then they need more of the medication to combat the depression because of gaining more weight, but then because of more, right, it makes sense, the more medication, the more weight they gain. And again, which is why they're trying to find healthy alternatives. They're trying to use amino acid therapy, which is why I think it's a revolutionary approach. You're able to, through urine analysis, measure the excrete of your kidneys to find out how many transmitters you have: serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. It's if proven correct and empirically validated, it can be a huge revolution.
How long, I don't know if you know the answer, like, how long does it usually take for the research and all that stuff to be done?
Long time.
Like 10 years or something?
That's pretty common, 10 to 15 years. Again, because you need lots and lots of samples, you need over periods of time, you need to see the effects afterwards. Are there any negative side effects? Is this making a significant impact? And by the word significant, usually means a lot of time has to pass in order to determine that. All right, alcohol, anti-craving treatment, first line. We have Camprol and Camprostat, anti-craving class, eases X-toxicity caused by withdrawal. We have naloxone, Revia, Depe, anti-craving class, mixed studies, most helpful in handling relapses. Alcohol, anti-craving treatment, second line, just more medications efficacious with bipolar and unipolar depression, schizophrenia. Alternative medicines we have here. We, again, won't need to go into specifics, but it's here for your convenience, the PowerPoint. Useful websites if you want to go into more detail, which I don't recommend. I think a more useful approach would be to network with psychiatrists.
Yes.
Learn from psychiatrists, because again, while you don't need to understand every aspect of the medication, you want to be familiar with the medication. For example, some of the common side effects of maybe the most prescribed medications for major depressive disorder, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. Maybe those are like the three common disorders associated with substance abuse. So you want to be familiar with Xanax. You want to be familiar with lithium. You want to be familiar with Ativan. You want to be familiar with anything else, right, that may come along with those disorders, so that way you can really educate your clients, anyone else involved in the client's treatment, for maybe flat affect or increased anxiety or increased weight gain. Again, it's going to be really helpful at the end of the day. If you have a good psychiatrist, though, you won't have to worry about a lot of that, because your psychiatrist will help
Another
educate you.
important aspect that I think about this is to identify that sometimes a client comes to your office and what she needs is increase of the amino acids. She's depressed, but actually her hormones are imbalanced. So
Yes, right, and that's why you want to work in a team. So that's oftentimes why you're required to work in a team too. You will have a medical doctor in the team, which typically is a psychiatrist. You'll have a nurse as a part of the team. You'll have you'll have a therapist as part of the team. You'll have someone from the family as part of the team. So you're getting a well-rounded perspective of the client, especially if you're in any facility that I used to work at, which was 24/7. You're also going to have staff there. You're going to have one teacher there. So you're getting a picture of the client at all times. So you're getting a picture of the client, what the client is like at school, which may be different from what the client like is in therapy, which you're going to get from the therapist, which may be different from how the client acts with the family, which is why you're going to have someone from the family, which may be different from what the client is telling the nurse when no one else is around, right?
Yeah, that's
So maybe he's telling the nurse, oh, I need a lot of anxiety, or I have a lot of anxiety, I need a lot of Xanax, versus in class, the teacher says, no, he doesn't have a lot of anxiety, he doesn't need Xanax. If anything, he keeps nodding out of class because he has so many medications prescribed at this point. So again, the more well-rounded, the more diverse your treatment team is, the better for the client, because then you can hold the client accountable for any inconsistencies, right? So that's what you also want to try and simulate in a private practice if you don't have that.
But like, let's say there's an inconsistency, but then you would address those with the motivational interviewing or something like that?
Oh, yeah, it depends on the rapport you build. I'll give you an example. This happened all the time. I developed a fairly good rapport with one client in particular that I'm about to describe to you. And this client was very, very well known for being inconsistent with a lot of different people, and very manipulative, right? And probably not the most treatment-friendly word, but I will call him out multiple times in treatment teams. And I would say, okay, I hear your teacher saying this, I hear your nurse saying that, help us connect the dots, go. And okay, I hear you saying that you're fine to the teacher when he asks if you need help, but then you're saying to your family that no one helps you, no one cares about you, and you want to leave here. Help us connect the dots. And they have to connect the dots. And then you can just keep them on track, and you hold them. And I've just gotten to points where I say, that's really consistent, that doesn't make any sense. I'm saying that you're manipulating the system, you're not taking it seriously, we're going to address this further in therapy. And right now, I'm just going to ask, and then I would redirect the conversation to the therapist, the psychiatrist to speak. And there are times where it's appropriate, where it's very, very, very assertive, borderline aggressive, because we had some very, very severe behaviors that were just not appropriate. So, yeah. It really depends on the rapport you build up. Because that can really upset a client, and there are times where it's okay to intentionally upset a client.
Did you have a client that was aggressive?
All the time.
All the time. But physically aggressive to you?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Towards
How do
you? Because I imagine that the situation that you've been describing, that can happen.
Yes.
And that you are a man, and you may deal with other men.
Yes.
And I'm a woman.
Yes. So that's also one of the reasons why usually in treatment facilities they pair a female with a female, a male with a male. That's almost always the case, because they can very well be aggressive. Now I will say females can be just as aggressive as males, but more often than not, females are going to be less aggressive. I think they're actually more aggressive in other ways. I think they can be very emotionally abusive to their therapists. Very emotionally abusive. So if you're not well trained, if you don't hold firm boundaries, and if you don't call them out really assertively, it can be really, really, I think, more draining in those situations than a guy who doesn't say much but just wants to punch you. Okay, I can deal with that. Some days I can deal with that a little bit more than being manipulated, very, very manipulated by different stories, and it can get really messy.
Okay,
All right.
so chapter 11, is that going to be included in our found?
Yes, only parts of it, majority of it won't. I would definitely just say the takeaways are half-lives, no different types of cravings or withdrawals, no, I think it was cravings, and just be familiar with what we said in the beginning of the PowerPoint, the first few slides. That's really about it. The overall concepts, very similar to your quiz today, it was more about the concepts. I'm testing as we move along more of your understanding versus just recalling or regurgitating that information. Well, that's really important in some aspects because you are going to have to remember some terms, remember some techniques or techniques names. It's going to be, at the end of the day, more important to understand the concept of addiction, understand what groups, psychoeducational groups mean, right? As one question on your quiz. Okay. All right. So I did have a video one more video. It's with the same Professor Dr. Phil Henry. He's being interviewed here. Just gives a more general description of addiction. Again, trying to not make this topic so boring because psychopharmacotherapy, as hard as it's pronounced, is just really not the most fascinating topic. Yes.
In next class, 11:29, is going to be 17 and 18 chapters.
So, do you have the syllabus?
Yes, I do.
Let me.
Is that the?
Okay, so today's November 15th. Next week we do not meet because it's Thanksgiving. So November 29th is basically when we're going to be going over chapter 17 and 18 in class.
17.
And chapter 17 and 18 in class that you could look over. I recommend looking over for the Thanksgiving Day or Thanksgiving week break, but it's not required. Chapter 17 and 18 will not be on your final. That I do know, but it is still going to be important to know just for you to
But
use
what
it
will
too.
be
And then
on the
the-
27, what you gonna go through on the day that I miss?
So the day that you're gone is the day that your 3 reflection papers are due, so please don't forget that. So it's due in 2 weeks. You'll have basically all next week to really make sure you attend those meetings and then write your reflection papers. But when we meet in 2 weeks, that's when it's due. So you can either bring it here, hard copy, or you can email it to me, whichever you prefer. Both are completely
You prefer
acceptable.
email?
I
My only
really
concern
not-
sometimes and if I email to you, just say, I received, I got it.
Yes.
Just something, yes.
Okay,
And
yes.
then I,
If you email it to me, I'll email you back confirming I
Just-
received it.
yes, I
Yeah.
got it.
I
That's
don't
it.
have
Yeah,
internet
okay.
yet. You know, I'm still selling in. That's kind of like. you
Yeah,
know,
that's totally fine. You can bring the hard copy, totally fine. Which, I mean, you already handed me two. So remember, 3 reflection papers are due in 2 weeks, and then during that time, we're going to go over chapter 17 and 18, and then review for the final exam.
Okay.
Okay? And we'll record that session as well, so it should be on Blackline in case you're not here. So you can still be a part of the discussion. Okay? I note about your papers that I did grade. It's really important that you read the instructions on the syllabus. I know there were some people who went over the word limit, right? The word limit was, I think, 800 or 850 words. And I had some individuals go over 3,000 words. So it's just really important to pay attention to that. And like grammar, punctuation, I know I said I would basically go easy on you all, which generally yes, but if it's to the point where I can't even make out the content or even understand the message you're trying to convey, there were points taken out for that. And then also the analysis part, right? So the 3 parts of the paper were to make sure you included an assessment, where the client is in regards to their recovery process, and then the analysis part, right? What exactly, in your clinical opinion, would you suggest? What are the treatment the treatment recommendations based on what we've talked about in here? What's the clinical rationale for whatever you suggest, right? It doesn't have to be long. In the example I think I provided, it was only maybe a paragraph or 2 at most. But I do want to see the connection, right? I want to make sure you not only can interview someone and assess someone regarding their recovery process, but also apply what we learned in here to that assignment. So again, with the reflection papers, just really make sure you read through the instructions of what it means to reflect using those observations, and then really trying to make that connection of the meetings to the class here. Were there concepts discussed in here, or did you observe concepts in the group that we have talked about in here? If so, please describe, etc. So just really make sure you look at the instructions. The rubric also outlines it too, because I literally just copy and paste the rubric at the end of the paper and say, hey, listen, these are the standards you met. And if you fell short, I try and include like a little paragraph or so as to why. Okay? All right, so let's watch the video for a little bit. And we'll talk about it. Okay, ready?
Drugs, alcohol, food, nicotine, and a lot of behavioral addiction that a lot of us experience out there. For instance, procrastination addiction is a big one. Food, sex and love addiction is a big one. Spending addiction in today's economy is a big one. We also cover criminal addiction. And, when I say criminal addiction, those two words back to back, criminal addiction, that really sound harsh. But I gotta tell you, if you're getting free cable and you're not paying for it, if you're bouncing checks, that is probably the lowest form of criminal addiction, but it's against the law. And a lot of us do it without knowing that we're, setting some kind of pattern up for us. And these patterns, whether it's that or drugs or alcohol, can sometimes go on for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. Today we have a very special guest on, like we do every week on our show. Dr. Phil Henry is a PhD. He is an associate professor with the Palm Beach Atlantic University. Dr. Phil Henry, welcome. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what it is you do.
Well, John, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I teach at Palm Beach Atlantic University. I teach in a graduate counseling department, and I have about 200 students there. They major in mental health, marriage and family, addiction. I teach the human development course, the substance abuse course. I do some of the internships as well.
You teach a lot of the professionals that are out there. I was talking to a colleague last week, and he's like, oh yeah, my wife studied under him. So yeah, a lot of the drug and alcohol professionals out here in South Florida have been taught by you.
It's a blessing to have so many and to kind of go out in the community and see students.
Yeah.
I've now been there 12 years. Select, you've been there for a while. I think we've had about 850 graduates. So that means that a lot of agencies, there's a student or some family member actually of a student. So that's kind of fun.
That's going to make you feel great. So you are a doctor of psychology, but you specialize in addiction.
Yes, I did my work at Temple University. I did some work and research in schizophrenia with doing research with clozaril and risperidol, which are drugs that first introduced in the United States. And then I did drug and alcohol groups in an adolescent center, alternative school, which probably was the most challenging place I did drug and alcohol groups.
Really?
Because if you've ever, I used to say that working with adolescents in groups with drug and alcohol is kind of like spitting in the wind. I mean, it has its challenges. And
now, was this recently or years ago?
That was years ago when I was first starting out. And then I went and did forensics, which is in a state mental hospital in prison doing groups with people who were mentally ill, who had been charged with crimes, but who also had addictions in the state hospital forensics unit.
As you can see, we have a great guest on today. Dr. Phil Henry is very knowledgeable about addictions. And Doctor, it seems like you covered a lot of ground, and a lot of our viewers are out there watching, and they have some of these things that you're talking about: addiction, criminal stuff, kids that are juveniles, teenagers that are involved with addiction. What can you say to those viewers that are watching? One of the questions we ask here is, how do you get a person to get clean and sober, whether it's a drug or an alcohol or even a behavioral addiction? What are some of the things you can, I know that's a...
Well, if I had the answer to that in one simple thing, I probably would have a lot more money than I have.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things you see is often is a maturing process happening in people.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize that your brain doesn't fully function until you're probably about 25 years old. So your frontal lobe, the part of your brain that's making decisions, planning, organizing, doing that process, it's probably not complete until 25. We have people a lot of times, if they start an addiction before that, we're trying to get them to think logically, thinking about the consequences, thinking about their behaviors when the software hasn't been installed yet.
Right.
And even the hardware in some cases. So if you take somebody 17, 18 years old, they're probably going to, I don't know about you, but I made better decisions as I got older. When I was 16, I hate to say it, I kind of was, very impulsive.
Right.
maybe a little impulsive still, but not as bad as when I was 16 years old. So a part of that is to help people be safe and make wise decisions until their bodies and their brains kind of catch up with them, kind of help them with that process a little bit. Second thing I would say is most of our decisions are couched in other decisions. And that, I'm going to call it the meaning that we make out of things is very, very important. So in other words, when you have an experience and you think about, oh, I lost my job, or I lost a loved one, or I'm struggling in school.
Yeah.
The way you understand that is very, very important because it can send you on a negative trajectory or a positive trajectory. And if you begin to build these negative thoughts about the situation, about yourself, I don't think we can tolerate that very much.
Yeah.
So we try to do something then to tolerate those negative feelings about ourselves or the situation. Aaron Beck said that depression was built on three different things: negative view of the past, negative view of the future, and negative view of yourself. He said it was like a structure. Whenever we get those three things, we tend to do something to fight against that in some way.
Yeah. Now, Aaron Beck, he was a founder of CBD, cognitive behavioral therapy.
CBT, yeah.
And, I've been studying that lately a little bit, doing some research about that. And it really is intensive. You have to look at your patterns, your behaviors,
Right.
And how that affects your thought process. And so it really is a study of self.
It's a study of self, and it's somewhat training yourself in awareness. So, for instance, I have a thought right now. A thought goes through my mind. I begin to say to myself, gosh, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Someone said, well, would you redo this? Suddenly I say to myself, I'm a bad person. I can never get it right.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? All of a sudden you say to yourself, oh my gosh, that came from them asking me to redo it. I have a set of rules which says I must be perfect. That goes down to this core belief about myself. If I'm not perfect, I can't be loved. I can't do things right. I'm not worthy. Then I have to defend against that in some way. And suddenly I feel hurt. I feel negative about myself just because someone says, would you mind redoing this? Again, the awareness of that process is very hard. Most of the time we do it a second, and I had that feeling. And what people why they end up using this, I can't tolerate that. I go right to the using.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I can't tolerate it. I go right to that point.
What a great logical academic perspective you just gave us on getting a person to change and look at themselves and rebuild the blocks like it really is, in a sense, that simple and that difficult, all the same answer. There's so many different ways to change. We have so many different people that are CEOs, leaders in the fields. We had a great guest on last week, and we're going to have more guests like that. He was from a Christian-based recovery center that was free, and I promise you, viewers, we're going to have more of that, because with today's economy, we need more services that you don't have to pay $10,000, $15,000 a month to get a loved one clean and sober. But back to Dr. Phil and your perspective on recovery and just rebuilding. I've studied under some great leaders of change, but this is one of the core building blocks that you're describing to us. Looking at self, and not so much, a lot of people come on and it's almost like they jump over a lot of this stuff and they go to the spiritual aspect.
Right.
And how that's going to cure or help us. And that does,
Well, I think the spiritual aspect does help because it helps you in some places re-understand yourself.
Yeah.
But just putting an overlay of spiritual things on things, and saying, well, and I've had a lot of experience in this.
Yeah.
In another life, I used to be a minister, so that's another story. But the reason why I got involved in psychology is I felt that a lot of people just put a spiritual veneer on things. They weren't really willing to look at themselves and be honest about what was going on in them and look at their emotions and their thoughts. And as a result, what happened was they weren't having real change. So I think that insight into yourself,
Yeah.
regardless of what your spiritual background, gives you some perspective on how you can change and what you need to change.
Yeah. You know, one of the people I studied under was Tony Robbins, Robbins Research Center. Dr. Richard Bandler, I was with him in Orlando for several months. And you know, the cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, he does the whole NLP thing. And, you know, it's really like cognitive behavioral therapy light, the NLP thing.
It's an interesting process where you're shifting and thinking about different things and moving those around. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ways to cut it.
Yeah.
I think in addiction, the major thing to go back to is things are so married together. And what I mean that they're so tight together.
Yeah.
But there's never a place for a break where the person says, no, wait a minute, what am I doing in this process, right? Whenever I have a feeling, whenever I have that negative thought followed by that negative feeling, I jump right to the drugs, the alcohol, whatever that thing is, the shopping, the whatever, so quickly that I never have a chance to go, oh my gosh, I'm lonely.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's Friday night, I'm by myself. It's not that I just want to drink, whatever. I feel lonely, and if I'm home by myself, I'm a loser, and I don't want that feeling, so I'm going to go out and do these things so I don't have that feeling.
Yeah. You know, I really love the way you're laying this out for us. I love the way you're explaining it. It really is a perspective we really haven't heard that much of. I mean,
Okay.
it's really one of the building blocks. It's the meat and potatoes of, you know, getting better, no matter what ails you.
Right.
And you really do come off and explain it simply. And it's a very complex thing, and that's a lot, that's talent. When you can explain something that's very complex, and it's easy to understand.
That probably comes from students asking me so many questions.
Yeah.
You know, you have to go back and you have to say, well, what really is the important point here, right? If I'm going to start to do therapy with somebody, what do I say to them? What do I ask them? What do I focus on in some way? And I think the meaning that we make from experiences and our thinking process in that is very, very important, both from a spiritual standpoint, but even the mechanism to even get up to a spiritual standpoint. I think sometimes people with spiritual backgrounds set the cookies so high up on the shelf that people say, you know what, I would love to be able to believe all that, but I can't even get started. I mean, you're asking me to do something like to do high school work, and I'm just starting out, you know, in elementary school. Maybe I'll get to that at some point, but it's very difficult for me to do it right now.
Our guest is Dr. Phil Henry, Associate Professor at Palm Beach Atlantic University. You are watching Life Addictions Recovery Show. We are going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to ask Dr. Phil Henry about how it is neurotransmitters work and the detoxing of drugs and alcohol and some other things. And as you see, he's going to explain it in such a way that is going to be simple to understand, and you're going to want to tune back in. Please come back. We'll be back in just a minute. Hi, John Lausch here, and you're watching WRPBI TV. Hi, and welcome back to Life Addictions Recovery Show. Our guest, Dr. Phil Henry, and you just saw a commercial about our product we have here at Life Addictions Recovery Program. It's called the Recovery Pod. You know, we're talking about reprogramming the brain, learning, trying to get out of an addiction. And one of the laws of learning is the law of repetition and the law of recency. So hearing something over and over again and hearing it, you know, you learn what you hear the latest is what our product, the Recovery Pod, offers. You open it up, you turn it on, and you hit play. Very simple. It's already downloaded, as you've seen. It's a great product. We have one for drugs, we have one for alcohol, and we're coming up with one specifically for prescription drug addiction. Doctor, what do you think about a product like this that's portable, that's easy to use? It works best if you're in 12-step meetings or in some kind of counseling, but if you don't have any of that, it's a great
Well,
one.
I think the repetition is actually a secret, because what you're actually trying to do is reprogram your thinking.
Yeah.
So the more often that you hear something, the more you learn it. I'm doing a distance program in psychopharmacology at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and I have all my lessons on the iPad. I play those over and over again, and I learn those lessons. If you're interested in recovery, if you play those messages all over again, you'll learn those until where they'll be second nature. You know, you don't even have to think about it. You start to think that way before you even know it.
You really do have to reprogram your thoughts, and that's a great way to do it. Check out our website at lifeaddictions.com for more information on that. Doctor, I want to ask you about some of the recent work you're doing. You did a lot of work in your career. I'm very impressed, I must say. But your latest work is very interesting, and it falls in line with how to get a person to get better, but physically. And tell us a little bit about how your neurotransmitter work is going.
Well, I'm very excited about that because I think that many times an addiction is simply a compensatory strategy, a way of dealing with the way that our minds work. For instance, I have a little attention deficit.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I jump around and think about different things. Well, I didn't know that one of the neurotransmitters that I'm lacking in is dopamine. And a little bit of norepinephrine. And then what I found is when I tested my neurotransmitters, I was low in these things. Bringing those low transmitters up to a normal balance level, or taking the ones that are high and bringing them down, brings the brain sort of into sync with each other. And most addictions, or a lot of addictions, are attempts to kind of compensate for where the brain is lacking. There's different receptors of dopamine. V2 is the one that all the pleasure things seem to hit.
And we all have these, right?
We all have all these neurotransmitters, right? Dopamine, norepinephrine.
They're in our body, they're in our cells.
In our body, in our cells, in our brain, at certain levels. Naturally, some people are, let's say, low in dopamine. If I'm low in dopamine, I will try to do things to raise that dopamine level.
Right.
Eating, for instance, will raise it 2 to 3 hours. So when we eat, we'll raise that dopamine 2 to 3 hours. When I go shopping, for some people, gambling, sex, alcohol, dopamine, it's going to boost that, and we're going to feel, that I feel better, I feel kind of normal. So what happens is, after a while, we begin to say, well, that's the way I'm going to feel better or normal, because that's low. Now, what happens when you go into recovery? When you go into recovery, the dopamine level drops back to where it is normally, and you say to yourself, oh my God, this is horrible. My life is horrible. I feel horrible. You know, is my whole life going to be this way? Well, part of it is diet, part of it is exercise, but you can also take some supplements that raise the neurotransmitters that are low up to a higher level, and then for the first time in your life, some people feel normal. I had somebody who was taking Xanax, having panic attacks. They start taking more and more Xanax, more and more Xanax. You know what happens? It's like digging a hole to get out of it. The more you take the Xanax, the better you feel, but then if you stop the Xanax, you have panic attacks.
So many side effects.
You feel like you want to die. So there are some products that boost GABA, which is
another
neurotransmitter that is in Xanax. Is what Xanax makes, basically. Actually, what alcohol makes. It keeps a lid on everything, keeps everything down. But if you give your bodies the raw material to make that, your body makes enough GABA and it lowers it naturally.
So you have a way, through a urine test, to find out what the different levels of a person's neurotransmitters are.
Right.
And then if you see some that are fine, that's good. If you see some that are low, you give them some of this raw material to help them produce it themselves.
Absolutely, and some of it is as easy as eating. Most of the neurotransmitters are made from amino acids, which are made from proteins. So do you ever notice, I've had some people who are bodybuilders and they work out, and what they discovered is, oh my gosh, I'm more focused, I'm more in tune with things, and you're like, well, how does that work? Well, you're giving your body the raw materials to make those neurotransmitters and balance it. And you often see people recovery, right? Start to get a recovery, what do? They might start to go to the gym, they start to eat differently, they pay attention to their, well, they're improving across the board. And then you don't go back to the addiction because your life is actually completely different. You've grown sort of beyond that point, and you can't make yourself small and go back in there anymore.
Yeah. So what are some of these, you mentioned a couple raw materials, but specifically, so a person can go to their local pharmacy and get a multivitamin that's heavy and,
Well, here's the problem. This
or is
is
it more specific?
This is probably why the testing is important.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. You might be low in something and you need it boosted, or you might be high in something
And you need to lower.
and you need to lower. And guessing is not really.
Right.
I'm not too bad at guessing, and I guess wrong about myself.
Yeah.
So, my hit rate on that is not very good. I thought I was actually high in a lot of things. I was like, well, that's the reason why I have a problem with attention. I think I'm probably too high, I have too much. And when I tested it, it was low. I was like really surprised. The other thing which is important is some of the medications that you get. For instance, and people have to be careful with this, with Paxil and Zoloft and some of the antidepressants actually have an effect on the other neurotransmitters. So if you think about this, it's almost like a teeter-totter, where when you mess around with one, it moves other ones. So you actually have to be careful about just going out to the store and going, well, I'm going to go get a whole, and you know,
Multivitamin.
if you're dead, right,
Yeah.
more is better. So
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
go, I've got to tell me, just take a handful of different kind of vitamins and I'm like, I'm doing the best I can do. I'm taking a lot of vitamins, that must be a good idea.
Yeah.
Not always the best idea.
You know, I'm gonna bring this to back to addiction, and for the viewers that are watching, you know, it really is about our thoughts, about how we feel about our bodies and how our bodies make us feel. So, Dr. Phil, there's so much more to cover. We need to have you back
I love to come
on another show to talk more about this. We still have some time. For some of our viewers, so you don't see patients, you teach?
I see some clients.
You see some clients?
I have a small practice because I teach for the most part.
Yeah.
But I see some clients and I work with some drug and alcohol programs just to, institute some. I think probably in about 10 years, this neurotransmitter testing is probably going to be widely used. Integrative psychiatry and integrative medicine is headed in that direction. But right now, it's a lot easier just to sort of give somebody a pill than it is to do the testing and really do the information.
And the testing is getting more and more streamlined, isn't it?
It's getting much better.
Yeah.
I think there was only one place in the country that was doing it a couple years ago. Now we're doing more. I'm doing a national conference on it coming up in September. I think it's being more accepted.
Doctor, do you have a website or anywhere where we can see some more information on maybe your upcoming conference?
Well, Neuroscience is one of the companies that I'm working with.
Okay.
And they have a lot of information on their website. It's neurorelief.com.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to be speaking at the American Association of Christian Counselors up in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
They have about 6,000 to 8,000 counselors that are going to show up at the Opryland Hotel. So,
Dr. Phil Henry, ladies and gentlemen, from Palm Beach Atlantic University. It has really been a pleasure, Doctor.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and we're going to have Dr. Henry back on, I guarantee you. My name is John Lausch, and thank you so much for tuning in again to Life Addictions Recovery Show.
All right. So what do you think?
Very technical.
It is very technical.
I love the way he said about thoughts, being negative, invest in yourself, future, and go to form depression.
Yes.
It looks so simple that
Yeah.
you rethink. It reminds when you say to reframe.
Yes.
So
Yes. You also mentioned core beliefs, so it's really important to know the core beliefs of the client. I think one of the best ways to understand how core beliefs work in a client is to understand your core beliefs as a therapist. So I would say not only apply this for your clients in the future, but apply it to yourself now. You guys are going through some really tough times. I mean, going through undergraduate school, especially if you're working full-time, you're going to school, you're taking 2, 3, 4 classes at once, it can be extremely tough. There'll be lots of opportunities for you to really learn about what you believe what your core beliefs are regarding school, right? I thought that was a great example. I think he even mentioned it with school, right? If I fail a test or someone tells me to redo something, if I don't do well, okay, does that mean I can't do it correctly? I have these lists, lists of beliefs. One of my beliefs is I have to do everything correctly, I have to do everything perfectly. It doesn't mean I do everything perfectly. It means that I'm not worth it, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not going to be able to make it, right? And those are really strong core beliefs, and it's really important to know that about yourself so that you can reshape your thinking. You can, first of all, know that that's what's happening, and then two, change it or try to change it, right? And that's what eventually we want to do with the client. A lot of times, actually, in grad school, you will role play client and therapist. You will be encouraged, just like you're being encouraged now to go to AA means, to go to a therapy session. Yes, pay $70, go to 2 or 3 therapy sessions, and try out the experience. Literally, one way to empathize with your client is to be a client and to learn about yourself. That way you can be more effective as a therapist. So, highly recommended. I thought it could be a really helpful video, especially to such a dry topic.
Yeah. Are you going to make this video available?
Yes, this video will be available on Popular Line. Again, it is still going to be recorded on the actual video if you have access to it. Please go ahead and try to access last week and this week's video. If you cannot access it, let me know. I'll try and find a way for you all to get it. It's written on Popular Line, right on the tab. You should just be able to press play. Under the Lessons tab, you know how the Lessons tab has week 1, 2, 3, all the way down. Click on week 12, and I think this week is week 13. If you click on it, it should have the video on there, as well as the PowerPoints to follow along.
On my phone, it said unavailable, but I tried.
Yeah, okay, try, I guess, on your laptops. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and try and get Kevin.
I tried on the church, at the church.
Cell phones can't do it.
I tried on the church.
Okay, yeah. And then if you ever have time, try, if you have computers here, try them there as well.
Okay.
But as far as I've tried, I'm able to access it on laptops and desktops.
Okay.
I haven't tried phone though, so that's why I was wondering. Or maybe that could be it. Okay? All right. So happy Thanksgiving. I will see you all in 2 weeks. Don't forget your 3 reflection papers, okay? Either email it to me or read the class. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy Thanksgiving.
For you, your family,
Thank you.
your baby.